Good morning. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Lizzie Burden in London, and these are the stories that set your agenda. The record-breaking rally rolls on. Global stocks hit all-time highs on signs the US and China are nearing a trade deal. Copper jumps, gold and silver slide. And investors' focus turns to the upcoming summit between Presidents Trump and Xi, as negotiators from both sides say that they've settled a range of contentious issues. Plus, Milei's midterm miracle. Argentina's libertarian leader scores a major comeback, winning elections to the country's Congress and a renewed mandate for his reform agenda. Happy Monday, everybody. And indeed, it is a happy Monday by the looks of the markets this morning. We already had global stocks at all-time highs going into Trump's Asia tour, and then the mood music out of Malaysia really setting the table for a deal between Trump and Xi on Thursday. So we've got futures pointing higher on both sides of the Atlantic this morning, and already gains of 1.4% in the Asia session. Flip the board over to the cross-asset picture, and the rally continues there. We have oil higher on the expectation that lower tariffs, better trade means more global growth. So Brent crude trading at $66 a barrel, up 0.7% at the moment. Less need for safe havens, meaning that gold is lower this morning, down 0.8%. And of course, we had that US CPI print on Friday, softer than expected, setting us up for a Fed cut this week. The 10-year yield had dropped below 4%, but it's slightly above there now. 4.03 is where we trade at the moment, and euro dollar at a 1.16 handle, because of course we also have an ECB this week. It's not going to be in Frankfurt. This week it's in Florence, but euro dollar trading there pretty steady at a 1.16 handle. But let's get more on the Asian market reaction to the US-China trade progress. Winnie Xu joins us now from Hong Kong. What are you watching, Winnie?
Happy Monday, Lizzie. Like you mentioned, it is a very positive session today here in Asia, especially when you look at what's going on in the Chinese assets, because we are seeing how this latest development between U.S. and China trade talks is really helping sentiment there. Here we are looking at the offshore and onshore stocks both up about 1%, and also the offshore yuan strengthening a little bit. And that really is coming on the back of these developments when it comes to trade talks, but also how China is finally also on the same page with the U.S. and that they've reached that framework. And you can see how this is setting a pretty positive tone ahead of the two leaders' expected meeting later this week. Now, there was a lot that happened over the weekend, whether it's the discussion around tariffs, fentanyl, or also rare earth. But sector-wise, we were seeing gains when it comes to the shipping sector because of that development in this discussion, but also a bit of a downside when it comes to the soybean stocks, because China is now expected to import more soybeans from the U.S. Now, also helping the sentiment when it comes to Chinese market is that upbeat industrial profits, and also how the PBOC is now setting a stronger fixing. Now, broader Asia, you are looking at here the MSCI Asia gauge actually up 1.5%, and that is bringing us to the latest record high. And it is also supporting sentiment in Japan and South Korea. Just now, on the previous board, we saw how the Nikkei 225 actually hit that 50,000 level, and the Kospi crossed that key benchmark level of 5,000. So it really helps the overall sentiment when it comes to the broader Asia stocks. And emerging markets also enjoying a bit of a tailwind, because Trump just signed some of these key trade pacts with the Southeast Asian countries. Now, remember, it is a very busy week for global stocks, but also for Asia, because we are in the busiest week in terms of earnings for this quarter, with with about 500 Asia companies reporting earnings this week. So we are going to be expecting the attention to shift to the more fundamental side of things later this week. But when you look at what's going on cross asset, we are still seeing that nice tailwind because of the easing tension between U.S. and China. So overall, Asian currencies strengthening against the dollar, with the Korea won here leading gains because of its more riskier profile there. But also China proxies, including the Aussie dollar and the Kiwi dollar, also strengthening more because of that preference for the riskier assets.
OK, well, Winnie, thank you so much for the latest on the market reaction there. Just as you've been speaking, so has the president himself. The president aboard Air Force One telling reporters that when it comes to a US-China deal, nothing has been agreed to yet, but the feeling is good so far. The Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, saying that there is a framework for Trump and Xi to decide on when it comes to their Thursday meeting. But Trump saying also we might sign a final deal on TikTok on Thursday. TikTok's something that they're definitely going to talk about, he says. Now, he's also been talking, the president, about Canada. He says they'll let Canada know when the tariffs are going to take effect. This, of course, the tariffs that are being put in place in punishment for Ontario's ads on tariffs. Trump says that Canada's been ripping us off for a long time, and he isn't going to be meeting with Prime Minister Mark Carney for a while. He also has some words for Vladimir Putin. He says that Putin ought to get the war in Ukraine ended. So President Trump there with lots of comments on the Air Force One as he travels around Asia. But of course, as we say, all eyes on that meeting on Thursday with President Xi. And we can get more detail on that now. We have top trade negotiators from the US and China saying that they've reached an agreement on a range of contentious issues, setting the stage for Donald Trump and Xi Jinping at their meeting to finalize a deal on Thursday. The US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says that he expects China to defer its rare earths export curbs ahead of the summit between the two leaders this week.
I'm also anticipating that we will get some kind of a deferral on the rare earth export controls that the Chinese had discussed.
Okay.
But again, this will all be, my counterpart, the vice premier, and I have set the framework, and it will be up to the two leaders to discuss the final terms.
For more, I'm joined by Bloomberg's Avril Hong, who's in Kuala Lumpur at the ASEAN summit. And good to see you, Avril. I wonder, is it really much of a win for the US if China only puts its rare earth export controls on ice on Thursday?
Yeah, Lizzie, I mean, that's a good point, right? Because when it comes to rare earths, I think what we're seeing right now for the US is that it has managed to avert some of these supply chain disruptions, at least in the interim, and the impact on potentially electronics as well for the US. Keep in mind that this is following on from earlier in the year where we saw China really wielding that Trump card and using rare earths as leverage and enforcing some of these restrictions. More recently, we heard how they threaten not just restrictions tighter on some of these rare earth exports, but also the technology that goes into making this. So I think it's fair to say that this delay of sorts, or the signals that we're going to get some form of a delay, is very, very promising and a win by the US standards. But as you know, with these negotiations, it ain't over until it's over. And you just highlighted there what we heard from the US president. So it's a situation that could be very fluid and quickly change. I would also just highlight, when it comes to some of the nuances we've been hearing from the US negotiators, they've also talked about how the Chinese side seem determined or open to upping soybean purchases. But analysts that we've already been speaking to say this is sort of low-hanging fruit. If you think to how some of these Chinese crushers are probably already quite well stocked into next year, that raises the question, how much will they actually purchase? For now, though, the tone is positive. Maybe we avert 100% tariffs for China, and then you see both the US and Chinese trade negotiators setting up this trade framework in order for their bosses, Trump and Xi, to sign some form of a trade agreement come Friday, or Thursday, I should say, in Korea.
Well, just as you've been speaking, Avril, we've had the president saying that he thinks we'll have a successful transaction with President Xi. They're going to have a great talk, he says, but also he says they're not looking to hurt shipbuilding in South Korea. So, Avril, just walk us through the other trade deals that President Trump's unveiled on day one of his Asia trip.
Yeah, it's a flurry of activity from the moment that the U.S. president set foot off Air Force One. He was dancing on the tarmac. So you can imagine the kind of deal-making activity that was underway. We saw deals with Vietnam, Thailand, Cambodia, as well as Malaysia. Now, why this is important is because part of this is efforts for the U.S. to secure critical mineral supply chain, and that speaks to the importance of this part of the world as well, because we didn't just see some of these countries getting exemptions from tariffs for certain products. It was also about MOUs being signed, critical minerals deals being signed as well. Now, not as extensive as what we saw from Australia and the U.S. not so long ago, but again, it speaks to the importance of the region. And don't forget, for the likes of Malaysia, for example, this is a country that wants to move up the rare earth supply chain. For the moment, it is quite limited in terms of what it can refine when it comes to these critical minerals. So that is among the key points that have come out from these trade deals here at the ASEAN Summit.
So, Avril, just walk us through what's next on the Asia tour.
So from here on out, as you know, the U.S. president has just been speaking on Air Force One. He'll actually be touching down in Japan, where he's expected to speak to the newly minted Japanese Prime Minister, Sanae Takaichi. And of course, this all has been seen as a sort of diplomatic test for her very early on into her administration, her leadership. They've held bilateral phone calls a couple of days ago, and for all accounts and intents and purposes, the tone from that did sound very positive. And following on from Japan, of course, we know how the U.S. president heads on to South Korea, where hopefully we will see some agreement with his Chinese counterpart.
OK. Avril Hong, we thank you so much. Bloomberg's Avril Hong out of Kuala Lumpur. And now we can look at the global market reaction to this US-China trade progress. Valerie Teitel, our markets reporter, is here with more. Val, just talk through us how widespread the risk-on mood actually is.
Equities are higher across the globe. Lizzie, actually, the global equities in the MSCI All-World Index hitting a new record high. We're seeing record highs across the world. S&P futures, NASDAQ futures trading at record highs, and the MSCI Asia Pacific also breaching fresh record highs in the session of 1.5%. All this excitement is really down to that delay on this rare earth export controls coming out of these negotiations over the weekend in Malaysia. Equities are definitely cheering this year-long delay that Scott Bessent had teased over the weekend. The risk-on mood is affecting the Treasury market as well. We're lower in price across the curve, really erasing this bid into Treasuries that we had on Friday after the soft CPI report. As you mentioned, Lizzie, we're now back up above the 4% level on the U.S. 10-year yield, just trading right below 4.04. Again, the Treasury market will be a key focus going forward. We do have the Fed decision on Wednesday, but this risk-off mood is also affecting the price of gold. We are back towards eyeing the 4,000 level when it comes to the yellow metal, on a back foot for gold, down 0.8%.
And Val, there's going to be a key test for the stock rally this week. You've got 5 of the Mag 7 reporting earnings, 3 central bank decisions as well. It feels kind of make or break this week.
A lot is on the line, especially when it comes to whether this tech rally can continue, this AI excitement trade can continue. As you mentioned, 5 of the Mag 7s are reporting this week, making up a quarter of the S&P 500's market cap. They don't start until Wednesday after the bell, so this is going to be in the back half of the week. We hear from Microsoft, Alphabet, and Meta on Wednesday after the bell, and then Apple and Amazon on Thursday. Now, this comes amid suspicion that we will see declining EPS growth quarter on quarter for the Mag 7s. Now, we were due to see, this is from Bloomberg Intelligence, I should say, a 14% expansion in EPS growth. Now, note that is the lowest since 2023, but 14% EPS growth is still double the remainder of the S&P 500. So we're still hoping that these Mag 7 stocks, these AI-related stocks, will be driving most of the gains going forward for the broader index. And don't forget, we do have a lot of central banks to contend with this week. The big one is the Fed. That comes an hour earlier London time this week. The press conference starting at 6:30, the decision at 6 p.m. We do also have the Bank of Japan and the ECB, but nothing is expected coming out of those meetings. The big one really is the Fed and how they interpret last week's CPI print. Lizzie.
All right, Valerie, thank you so much, setting us up for the week ahead in earnings and central bank decisions. And you can get a roundup of the stories that you need to know to get your day going in today's edition of Daybreak. Terminal subscribers can find it by going to DAYB Go. But coming up on the programme, Javier Milei's party wins Argentina's midterm vote in a major comeback. We're going to look at what it means for his free market agenda next. This is Bloomberg.
Wednesday, the Fed decides.
This Fed is anchored to a massive step down in payrolls.
They are data dependent. We have no data. As far as the employment picture is concerned, I think that they have a pretty good read.
Trust Bloomberg to bring you the fastest coverage and exclusive analysis, including Powell's press conference.
The Fed remains on track to cut rates. You looked at the dot plot, and the dispersion looked like a B-52 bomber's wingspan.
Tune in to Bloomberg Surveillance. The Fed decides, starting at 1:30 p.m. Eastern.
Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe and to Argentina now, where President Javier Milei's party has won the midterm elections. The comeback gives him a stronger foothold in Congress as he seeks to pass major reforms. For more, I'm joined by Bloomberg's Carolina Millan. And Carolina, it's a landslide victory compared to expectations. We've been hearing from US President Donald Trump on Air Force One, telling reporters that Milei had a lot of support from him. So how much was it down to Trump's support?
Well, certainly what we see from the result of this vote is that Argentine voters are certainly in favor of the economic overhauls that Javier Milei has been proposing since he entered Argentina's political scene. What we also saw over the past few weeks was that there was volatility in the currency, and that's where U.S. President Donald Trump and his government has stepped in to shore up the currency and to also bolster support by promising a swap and a possible credit line to be arranged with banks. So certainly it was a helpful show of support that helped Milei avoid some of this currency volatility that affects voters in the run-up to the election.
So how much fire does this light underneath Milei's plans to overhaul the Argentine economy?
Well, Lizzie, while Javier Milei's party still won't have outright majorities in Congress, that means that they will still need to make some alliances with other parties, but this significantly improves their standing in Congress. And that what this means is that Javier Milei and his government will be able to pursue some of the big economic overhaul reforms that they have been discussing as very important for the economy. That includes, for example, labor reform, tax reform, and pension reform. So it's going to be very interesting to see in the coming weeks how fast he can advance with his agenda.
And just walk us through the expected market reaction, because we've already seen early indications on the crypto market of the peso higher against the dollar.
Absolutely. So unlike some other emerging market assets, Argentine assets don't trade throughout the day. So that the crypto indications are suggesting that that Argentine assets will be rallying on Monday. We knew that markets were expecting 30% result for the party as a very positive one. It's above 40%. So we should be seeing some price action on bonds, which are the first assets to start trading, the sovereign bonds, and then the peso further into the Argentine morning.
OK, really great to get your analysis. Thank you so much, Carolina Mian, on the Argentine election. And we also have been hearing from the president as well, just saying that he's going to make a decision on the Fed maybe by the end of this year. But also on Argentina, he would consider more support for Argentina if needed. So lines still crossing from the president as he speaks to reporters aboard Air Force One. But coming up on Daybreak Europe, we're going to turn back to Europe with EU leaders finally settling a row over ambitious new climate targets ahead of COP30. We'll get you all the details from our BNF team next. This is Bloomberg.
Earnings season is here.
European earnings in focus. We'll break down the results.
Bloomberg is first to break the numbers.
And we bring you some earnings that are coming through a Nordea Bank.
LVMH reporting a surprising return.
And BP.
The earnings story, I think, is really fascinating.
There's just so much news.
With the smartest insights.
It has been a record half-year result. We are committed to capital return. We were even able to increase our outlook. It's very good news, I think, for our shareholders.
Continuing coverage on Bloomberg.
Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. Well, here in Europe, EU leaders are paving the way for a deal on ambitious new climate targets by agreeing to support key industries and to cut red tape during the green transition. The pledges will form the basis of the EU's COP30 climate platform, with the leaders' summit in Brazil now less than a fortnight away. For more, Bryn Mary Merkley, analyst from our European transition team over at BNF, joins me now for more. Bryn, welcome to the set. Just set the scene for us, first of all. How are countries doing with their 2035 emission-reducing targets?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Lizzie. So countries have been very slow to submit their updated climate plans. And these plans are known as nationally determined contributions, and they're due every 5 years under the Paris Agreement, and they should contain countries' 2035 emission reduction targets. But as you say, we're just 2 weeks away from the first day of COP, and only 62 out of 195 parties have actually made their submissions on time.
Wow, OK. So what about the EU's emission reduction targets, if that's the country-level ones?
Absolutely. So even the EU, a longtime leader on climate ambition, has missed 2 deadlines to make its submission. And one reason is because it's been looking to submit its 2040 target before making its decision on its 2035 target. And its 2040 target would be a 90% reduction from 1990 levels by 2040, and that would amend its European climate law. But EU leaders have been unable to come to an agreement. So last month, the Council of the EU did submit a range of what its likely 2035 targets could be, which is between 66.25 and 72.5% reduction from 1990 levels by 2035. But again, they haven't come to a formal agreement on this. And, anything above a 70% reduction would be in line with a net zero pathway. OK, so the deadline's approaching. Yes. Things are not looking good.
Why is the commitment so slow? Is it the Trump effect, perhaps?
Well, it's actually because the EU has been looking to submit this 2040 target ahead of the 2035. And the biggest area of contention is the use of international carbon credits. So EU leaders right now, they disagree on how flexible these credits should be. Right now, member states can use up to 3% reduction. But again, they just disagree on what this should look like, and they haven't been able to come to an agreement yet.
And so if you've got less momentum, and it seems like ambitions are weakening, how does it all affect how fast we actually solve the issue on the climate?
Yeah, so with the EU submissions missing, and as you say, with President Donald Trump removing the U.S. from the agreement, it certainly has contributed to a downturn on global climate ambition. And so with just 2 weeks away from COP, we do expect most economies to make their submissions by the end of the conference, but we don't necessarily expect these to be net zero aligned. OK, well,
I can feel the urgency, Bryn Mary Merkley, analyst from BNF's European Transition Team. We thank you so much for that analysis, and you can find it on the terminal. But coming up on Daybreak Europe, as stocks hit records, we're going to discuss investment strategy in light of that summit between Presidents Trump and Xi. Futures pointing strongly higher on both sides of the Atlantic. So that markets conversation next. This is Bloomberg. Good morning. This has been Daybreak Europe. I'm Lizzie Burden in London, and these are the stories that set your agenda. The record-breaking rally rolls on. Global stocks hit all-time highs on signs the US and China are nearing a trade deal. Copper jumps, gold and silver slide. Investors' focus turns to the upcoming summit between Presidents Trump and Xi as negotiators from both sides say that they've settled a range of contentious issues. And Milei's midterm miracle. Argentina's libertarian leader scores a major comeback, winning elections to the country's Congress and a renewed mandate for his reform agenda. A very good morning. If you're just joining us, it is 6:30 a.m. here in London, and the markets look like this. Feeling good in the futures picture, and feeling good is just what the President Donald Trump has told reporters he is on Air Force One. Of course, he is looking ahead to his meeting with President Xi on Thursday. He says nothing has been agreed to yet, but the vibes are positive. You can see futures pointing higher on both sides of the Atlantic, and already gains of 1.6% in the Asian session. If you flip the board over to the cross-asset picture, you can see the risk-on mood in full display there too. The US 10-year Treasury yield at 4.03. It was just below the 4% level on Friday after that softer-than-expected US CPI print, and that setting us up for a Fed cut on Wednesday. But also look at oil, $66 a barrel there on Brent, on the expectation of more growth if there isn't as much of a sense of tariff tension between the US and China. So up 0.7% for Brent. Gold weaker, as you would expect, by 0.8%, getting closer to that 4,000 level this morning. And euro dollar pretty steady at a 1.16 handle. We also have, of course, that ECB decision this week. It's in Florence, not Frankfurt, but pretty steady here on euro dollar. But let's get back to our top story now. American and Chinese trade negotiators saying that they've struck a slew of agreements on issues spanning tariffs, shipping fees, fentanyl and export controls. The US Trade Representative Jameson Greer said that the two sides are firming up the final details ahead of that Trump-Xi summit on Thursday.
Our goal is to make sure that those controls that are very expansive do not go into effect. This is something that would affect not only the United States, it would also affect the rest of the world. It would gum up trade. It would give China control over technology transactions. It's completely unacceptable. So that's one of the major objectives of these talks, and I think we're progressing toward that goal very well.
Let's bring back Avril Hong. She's in Kuala Lumpur for us at the ASEAN Summit. Avril, expectations really high heading into Thursday. Just how comprehensive a deal can we actually expect?
Yeah, these expectations are high because of the tone that's come out between the US and Chinese trade negotiators. Remember, their job here is to sort of set things up so that Trump and Xi can finalize a form of trade agreement when they meet in Korea on Thursday. And so far, given the 2 days of negotiations that have been taking place between US and Chinese negotiators, they've come away with it saying that they have agreed on a range of contentious issues. This includes on fentanyl, on soybean purchases, and then, of course, rare earth. So for now, it sounds like China will be able to avert 100% tariffs from the US. Now, there are a couple of nuances when it comes to whether this is going to be comprehensive enough or not, because you look at rare earths, yes, we are getting a sort of delay, but this is not a removal of restrictions. And then soybean purchases. Think about how these Chinese crushers, they are already, as we've been discussing earlier on in the program, probably quite well stocked into next year. So even if they are committing to buy more US soybeans, how much can they actually take on? So there are a couple of these sticking points that we need to consider, even as we hear these good vibes only from the US and Chinese trade negotiators. And as to some of the other sticking points that we need to be watching out for, think about as well when it comes to the thornier issues, including differences on the sale of TikTok, or even Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the allegations, the leveling of these U.S. comments that China has really been facilitating Russia's war in Ukraine. So these are, I guess, higher level things that need to be worked out before we can call it a comprehensive agreement. For now, I think the best case that we can hope for is that there is a sort of trade framework where the two sides meet on Thursday to allow conversations and discussions on trade to continue between the US and China beyond that. Lizzie.
Okay, Avril Hong in Kuala Lumpur, we thank you so much for that reporting. And we can get analysis now in terms of the market reaction with Charu Chanana, Chief Investment Strategist at Saxo. She joins me now. I'm pleased to welcome you, Charu, to the programme. We were just talking about our expectations for this Trump-Xi summit on Thursday. Let's say that all they do is agree to extend the trade truce. Would that be enough to sustain the market rally we're seeing so far?
Hi, Lizzie. Thank you for having me back. Certainly, I think that is a very valid concern. It seems like those positive sound bites have been enough today. And that's because if you step back and look at it, I think we went into this meeting over the weekend with obviously some concerns whether even this meeting between Trump and Xi himself will go ahead or not. We had until last week some escalations around software exports. Before that, we had China escalations on rare earths. So I think going into the meeting, the bar was set pretty low. But now as we move towards Thursday with all of these positive sound bites coming in, of course, the devil still lies into the details. But I think the bar certainly moves a little bit higher from here. And the kind of market reaction that we are getting today, I think that again sets up, a very difficult picture for the two negotiators to really bring up a positive surprise on that day. I think the best case scenario right now still looks like, in the short term, we do not get those 100% tariffs on the 1st November deadline. And we get basically a continuation of a tariff pause here. But as Avril was also just mentioning, I think the structural differences between China and US here are far from being resolved. And that kind of keeps tensions high. Another thing is going into Thursday, the focus of the markets will also very much shift back to fundamentals, what we get out of the Fed meeting, what we get out of the big tech earnings. And I think those will be the more important drivers of the market as well at that time.
Well, let's talk about the Fed, because we've just had the US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent naming the Fed chair finalists. He's said it's Christopher Waller, Kevin Warsh, Kevin Hassett, Michelle Bowman, Rick Reeder. They're the names in the hat. Charu, just talk us through who is the most friendly to markets.
I think right now, the fact that these names are coming up from Scott Bessent, I think itself is kind of creating a pressure on the Fed. Of course, we know that the markets are almost fully pricing in a rate cut for this week, but the contention really is about what happens from here on. So I think at this meeting, it becomes really important to get to understand what kind of a split we get from the Fed board itself. Right, some of these names that you mentioned, Fed Governor Waller, Scott Bessent, some of the other names that you were just mentioning, they have been the ones previously who've been voting for bigger rate cuts. And if that continues to widen the split from some of the other members of the board, I think it continues to send some very, awkward vibes to the market, because even though the short-term yields continue to drop on the expectations of a rate cut, the trajectory of long-term yields continues to be very volatile.
You also mentioned earnings, and we've got, of course, 40% of the S&P reporting results this week, including 5 of the Mag 7 across 2 days. When it comes specifically to AI, how concerned are you that the revenue isn't keeping up or won't keep up with investment?
I'm sure, that has been the question that we've seen in the last few quarters as well. Certainly, the big tech have delivered heavily on the side of AI capex, but when it comes to monetization, the delivery has not been on track in line with the kind of capex investments that they've been making. But it's been very long that these mega cap companies have not delivered on expectations as well. So I think it takes quite a bit of a bold thought to be conscious or conservative on what happens. I think at least some of them, particularly I would say maybe Amazon or Microsoft, they are positioned well to deliver the kind of cloud growth and show real effects of monetization. Even Meta, with its ad efficiency gaining, I think they continue to show some impact of AI implementation in their business models. The question really is more about Apple, where we know for this quarter, of course, the iPhone sales could help them. But again, the question remains about what are they doing about AI and whether they do continue to lag that race in that sense. And then Alphabet, I think that remains a huge wild card because there is a sense that it can get some benefits again on the cloud front or the search front, but it is also facing some longer term threats to particularly its search business with these AI powered search agents that are coming in.
And I was interested, you flagged power as something that could hold back the AI build-out in the US, but it's not such an issue when it comes to Chinese AI tech. So how optimistic are you about Chinese AI?
I think the US AI story and the Chinese AI story has been different in that sense, where the US side has really focused on delivering the most powerful models from the get-go. But when you look at the Chinese side, the focus has been on efficiency and on building the infrastructure first. For example, in China, we've seen 10 nuclear plants start up this year, and there's plans for another 10 next year as well. So I think the power side, it looks like has been addressed as they go on to move on to this AI story as well. I don't think they've fully answered it. I think there could be concerns coming up because the amount of power that this AI technology needs is just massive, and no economy seems to be ready for that right now. And in that race to get the most popular model, I think the focus has continued to be shift towards the efficiency and the powerful, how powerful those models are. But certainly when you compare it, I do think the Chinese side has answered the infrastructure question a lot better than the US side, at least in this first 3 years of the AI story.
OK, and Charu, I just want to come back to where we started, trade, because the US-China trade talks have lowered gold today, this morning, but it's a dip that we've already been seeing. Is it a dip or is it the end of the bull run?
I think from a very short-term perspective, I think it is a dip, but what we need to watch is whether we get any kind of a squeeze, particularly coming out of that dip that we saw last week as well, where gold kind of touched the 4,000 level mark. Certainly, I think there were reports that a lot of dip buyers did come in at that point. So do they start to get squeezed? I think that is my big concern, but I don't think, we are at a point where we say that long-term geopolitical fragmentation is on a back foot. I think that is still continuing. We continue to see the Fed moving towards lower interest rates as well. So I think more long-term factors, both from a tactical as well as a structural standpoint, continue to be supportive for gold.
OK, always a pleasure to have you with us, Charu. Saxo's chief investment strategist, Charu Chanana, thank you so much for your insights this morning. Well, speaking of trade, South Korea's president is preparing to meet with President Trump on the sidelines of the APEC summit this Wednesday. Lee Jae-myung told Bloomberg that Seoul and Washington remain stuck on all the major details of a $350 billion investment pledge.
한미 간의 협상은 이제 안보 분야.
The negotiations between Korea and the United States are proceeding in two areas of security and economics simultaneously. Negotiations in the field of security issues are going very well, but negotiations in the area of economics, especially trade, have reached a preliminary agreement, and we're in the process of hashing out the details. The discussion is ongoing and there are some differences of opinion, but the delay does not necessarily mean that this is a failure. We already have a comprehensive agreement, and we're currently working on the details. So I would appreciate your patience.
일본과의 협상에 있어서는 좀 When it comes to Japan's deal, there have been some divergent interpretations. Is South Korea trying to make it more specific than Japan's? And if that's the case, could that become more burdensome for Korea later on?
대한민국은 일본이
Korea is not Japan. I do not fully know what deal the US and Japan have struck, but from our point of view, we have our own circumstances, and we will reach a rational result that suits us. Of course, the example of Japan or Europe could be a base that we can refer to, but in the end, we must find a way which takes into account Korea's circumstances, that is acceptable to Korea, and also helps the United States in its manufacturing renaissance. As we search for a mutually beneficial path, there will be differences as well as alignment of opinions.
In finding common ground, could the size of the U.S. investment fund become smaller?
The method of investment, the amount of investment, the timeline, and how we will share the losses and divide the dividends, all of these remain sticking points. The US will of course try to maximize its interests, but it must not be to the extent that causes catastrophic consequences for South Korea. The United States is the leading country in the world when it comes to democracy and rationality. South Korea is an ally and friend of the United States, so we believe that we will be able to reach a rational result that is acceptable to all sides, and this is what has to be done.
A highlight of the APEC summit is the upcoming meeting between Presidents Trump and Xi Jinping. How important is this dialogue for South Korea?
한국은 지금 공급망을 둘러싸고
When it comes to the supply chain, the world is divided into two blocks facing off each other, one led by the United States and one by China. Korea is situated both geographically and economically between these two. We are situated in between two grinding stones. It's a situation akin to having both arms pulled by China and the United States. This is both a challenge and an opportunity. We cherish our baseline policy emphasizing the Korea-US alliance and Korea-US-Japan trilateral cooperation. At the same time, we do not seek to sever ties or pursue excessive confrontation with China or socialist nations. Korea will continue to cherish and emphasize its alliance with the United States, and at the same time manage its relationship with China.
So that was the South Korean President Lee Jae-myung speaking to Bloomberg ahead of his meeting with President Trump later this week. And he mentioned President Trump's meeting with the Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi that is also upcoming. And we've just seen the Nikkei 225 breaking that 50,000 level in advance of that meeting, so up about 2.5%. But we've discussed a lot of the earnings coming up stateside. We've also got some of Europe's biggest names across banking, energy and autos reporting earnings this week. So we'll bring you a preview of all of that next. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. Now, markets are gearing up for a busy week as a slew of major European companies report third quarter earnings. Joining me for a preview is Bloomberg's Chloe Milei with what to watch across the key sectors. So I want to start with banks. How much are the warnings about, I hate saying it, cockroaches in credit actually transmitting across the pond, Chloe?
Yeah, well, we've seen that theme of kind of credit risk and the health of the credit market already cropping up in earnings calls for the banks that have already reported. So we saw Barclays last week, for example, saying that it had reviewed its entire loan portfolio because of that collapse of Tricolor. So we'll likely see that as also a dominant theme for the banks reporting this week. Deutsche Bank in particular is interesting because it has quite a lot of exposure to that commercial real estate market over in the US. There'll be other themes as well, trading activity and how much that's really boosted investment banking activities at SocGen, for example, and UBS will be key. And then post-failure of acquiring Sabadell, BBVA will be asked what's next, really, as well.
OK, so the consolidation one, a big theme. And we're also seeing oil up this morning because of the tariff story, but the trend has generally been weakness. So when we have the oil majors reporting, how much is that weakness likely to weigh on them?
Yeah, it is likely, as you say, that those weaker oil prices that we've seen over the third quarter will have dragged down those earnings. So we are seeing Shell, Equinor and then Total Energy reporting this week. So by the end of this week, we should have quite a clear picture of how much that kind of mixed commodity backdrop has weighed on them and how much they've been able to mitigate that. And of course, as always with oil majors, what investors are really keen to know is how much is that changing my shareholder returns. Yeah. And so companies will be scrutinized for that pace of share buybacks as well.
And of course, tariffs all important for the automakers, and they report too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, automakers, so Volkswagen and Mercedes are reporting this week. They are in many ways kind of in better shape and have a bit more clarity on those tariffs than they had at the previous earnings season. Of course, we've got the US and EU tariff deal that is adding to that a bit more certainty. But they're dealing with new challenges now, where we've got China putting those limits on exports of semiconductors that are used in that auto market. That's already creating disruption. So that will be a really important theme to look out for. So tariffs, then China, and that disruption in the supply chain will be key.
Well, let's see how much everything changes after Thursday, shall we, after that Trump-Xi meeting. But Bloomberg's Chloe Melly, we thank you so much for the preview. Now, to some other stories making news this morning. Novartis has agreed to buy biotechnology company Avidity Biosciences in a deal valued at $12 billion. It's the Swiss drug maker's biggest acquisition in more than a decade, and Avidity is developing experimental drugs to treat rare diseases. The deal adds to several potential blockbuster treatments for Novartis as generic competition looms for its current top sellers. Elsewhere, HSBC says that it expects a provision of $1.1 billion for litigation related to claims from investors who lost money in Bernard Madoff's Ponzi scheme. The provision will be recognised in the third quarter results due tomorrow. HSBC is defending a claim brought by Herald Fund SPC dating back to 2009, seeking restitution of securities and cash. And turning to France, where police have arrested several suspects in connection with the heist at the Louvre Museum. A manhunt was launched after 4 people broke into the museum and stole 8 pieces of jewellery, including royal necklaces, tiaras and earrings. Authorities say that one of the suspects was preparing to flee the country from Roissy Airport. Well, those are some of our top stories from around the world, but we've got plenty more coming up for you, so do stay with us. This is Bloomberg.
I can tell you they are, because we just finished 2 days of negotiations, and we've created a framework for the 2 leaders to discuss on Thursday in Korea.
US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent speaking there. Well, of course, it is a massive week when it comes to that Trump-Xi meeting and the US-China trade relationship. Just how comprehensive will that deal between the two of them be? Aside from soybeans and fentanyl and rare earths, there is also the question of to what extent Xi will help Trump to end the war in Ukraine. And that puts oil on the table. You can see here just how much China and India have already been reducing their purchases of Russian crude. The question being, how much more can those flows be limited? But while it is a massive week for trade, it's also a massive week for earnings as well. So flip the board over, because even if the mood music when it comes to those trade talks is positive, it is a make or break week when it comes to earnings. You can see here it is by far and away the busiest of earnings season. You've got about $27 trillion of market cap reporting this week. But flip the board one more time, because you can see just how high the bar is, just how impressive these earnings have to be to get the traders impressed. And compare the earnings versus expectations here, and it's this stocks just not getting rewarded for beating estimates so far. These are your charts to set you up for your day. The opening trade's coming up next with Val and Critty. This is Bloomberg.